Hello, my name is Dr. Ramsey. When we look at entrepreneurs, businessmen, and those who were trying to realize the American dream in the post-bellum era of the United States, the person that perhaps most exemplifies that great entrepreneurial spirit is Henry Ford. Today, I want to just use him as an example of the economic and business shifts that were happening in this era. Uh, Ford himself was fascinated by technology and at a very early age was able to secure himself several apprenticeships where he gained skills that eventually allowed him to be hired by the Thomas Edison Illuminating Company, and that was in 1891. And Edison himself, also an entrepreneur, inspired Ford himself actually. So he will work for Edison for a time, even become a chief engineer, and then will save up his money. And by 1896, decides to go out on his own and finance his own invention. And he comes up with what's called the Ford quadricycle, which will never take off, never be that popular. But it is not dissimilar from what was happening in Europe at the time. And this is this sort of mechanized early moving vehicle, not quite fully a car, but certainly not a bicycle. And while it didn't take off, it definitely showed Henry Ford that he could get into this unrestricted economic environment. You see, he was not in a world that was restricted by social class or by what caste system you were born in. And as such, a lot of grit, hard work, tenacity, and a little bit of investment money could go a long way. So he brings on William Murphy as a partner. They get some investors, and they create a business where they try to make mechanized moving machines, if you will. And the costs to move those were far too high, given the fact that the most Americans were still living as agricultural workers. And though the shift, thanks to the railroads, as explained in Vogel's article, started to bring more people into sectors near factories, it was still the minority of the American population. And as such, in order for one to be successful making something like this, you had to be able to bring the costs down. So by 1901, he shows that he's a force to be reckoned with as an inventor, builds and invents the 26 horsepower automobile and gets a great deal more shareholders and starts the Detroit Automobile Company. By 1903, he's reincorporated as the Ford Motor Company. And by 1908, he's developed the Model T, which is a game changer because it is a car that can be manufactured quickly. It is affordable to the common American and highly profitable. And by 1918, 50% of the cars in the United States were Model T vehicles. Now, what's interesting is one time Ford was visiting a slaughterhouse and he watched as the beef was put on the hook and moved down the line and taken apart piece by piece. And in that messy and smelly environment, he suddenly had a revelation. He thought, I wonder if you could reverse this project and put it together backwards. And that was the idea, the inspiration for his famous assembly line. And this is a big deal because it radically altered and changed the concept of life in factories. We move away, if you will, from artisans into unskilled labor. We increase the idea or the rapidity of production. It's the birth of real, true mass production, and the profit margins then, and the earning potential is much higher. So what happens when Ford is building Model Ts with his assembly line? Well, he can do things like unheard of things, like respond to some of the anti-capitalist sentiment of the day with things like a $5 minimum wage, profit sharing, a 5-day work week. Those were all things that Ford did that people thought were crazy and radically altered the landscape, not just of working in New York, but in factories across the country. David Meyer explains that the growth of the industrial sector in the Midwest, without the interference of like the Eastern firms early on, allowed for the Midwest to diversify its industrial sector through developing things like its own transportation set, means of production. And he's exactly right. And Ford is an example of taking advantage of that environment. Vogel's article talks about how the railroads brought in groups of people, shifting them into the urban sectors, but it's nothing compared to what Henry Ford will do. The automotive industry will give birth to new industries. We need tires, we need motels, we need roads. We need destinations. It'll increase the demand for universalized parts and so on and so forth. And then the the assembly line itself, we put into factories all across the country, changing everything from the production of hamburgers to things like phonograph. Now, keep in mind, with this improved working condition, this improved potential earning power, these same laborers become part of the mass consumers. It's a reciprocal cycle that we're all benefit meant to a large degree that allowed for this sort of rapid growth and expansion, and something that changed the landscape, not just of businesses, but of suburbs and human living in the first world all over the globe.